Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks about the mass hysteria case that occurred in 2011-2012 in Leroy, New York. Now, sometimes mass hysteria is also referred to as mass psychogenic illness or collective conversion disorder. So we see in late 2011, early 2012, about 12 teenage girls who were students at the Leroy Junior-Senior High School in Leroy, New York, began exhibiting symptoms like verbal and nonverbal vocal outbursts, spasms, and other symptoms of altered voluntary motor or sensory function. We also see reports of a second cluster of cases, one teenage male, one 36-year-old female, and two teenage females who lived 150 miles away. A lot was written about these cases. There are a lot of different theories as to what happened, including an official determination from the New York State Department of Health, which of course was a finding of mass psychogenic illness, again, collective conversion disorder, a number of cases of conversion disorder that happen within a localized area. We also see different information from different sources. So with a few of the elements of this situation, it's actually been hard to figure out what really happened. Even the number of people affected is reported differently in different sources. As usual, I put the references for the articles I used in the description for this video. Now, because this onset of symptoms in Leroy, New York involves potential mental health, biological, neurological, and medical information, it's a good time to point out that my PhD is in counseling. I'm a professional counselor, not a physician, I'm not a chemist, and in this video I'm not diagnosing anybody, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. Now, the fact that this case involves so many disciplines is actually one of the interesting components of the case. You have a lot of different professionals weighing in from their point of view, but of course they all have their area of expertise. For example, the physician doesn't necessarily know a lot about mental health. The chemist doesn't necessarily know a lot about biology. So I think that was a challenge here in resolving this situation and figuring out what was going on. Another interesting point here is the nature of conversion disorder. It requires that a physician rule out any medical cause before any other physician, counselor, psychologist, or anybody else can make a diagnosis. So before I get into any details with this situation in Leroy, New York, I'm going to cover conversion disorder. This is also referred to as functional neurological symptom disorder. Now, one important note here is at the time of these cases in Leroy, New York, the DSM that was being used was DSM-4-TR. Shortly after this, we see DSM-5 was published, and we see some changes in terms of the definition of conduct disorder. But if we look at these cases, this change really doesn't have any effect on them. So I'm going to go through the criteria from the DSM-5, the current understanding we have of conversion disorder, at least in terms of its definition. So we see 4 symptoms here for conversion disorder. 1 or more symptoms of altered voluntary motor or sensory function. Clinical findings provide evidence of incompatibility between symptom and recognized neurological or medical conditions. So this is not simply an absence of a medical explanation, but rather neurological symptoms that don't fit with pathophysiology. We also see that the symptoms can't be better explained by another medical or mental disorder, and that they cause clinically significant distress. Now, with these cases, there doesn't really seem to be any doubt that we see altered voluntary motor or sensory function. The symptoms that these individuals had were real. They weren't pretending. There's agreement on this point by pretty much all the professionals that were involved. There is mostly no doubt that the symptoms appear to be incompatible with recognized medical conditions, although this has been disputed a little bit, and I'll talk about this in a few moments. We certainly seem to see clinically significant distress. Again, no doubt here. The individuals with the symptoms were suffering because of the symptoms. The question that remains really revolves around the third criterion. Are the symptoms better explained by another medical or mental disorder? So criterion 1, 2, and 4, again, mostly seem to be met. It's criterion 3 that's at issue. So when the word of these cases first came out, it drew a lot of attention from the media, a lot of activity on social media as well. We saw numerous Facebook posts, YouTube videos, and other uses of social media to spread information about these unusual circumstances. Initially, there were a number of different theories as to what was causing the symptoms in all these different people. Essentially, it comes down to two categories in terms of theories. There must be a medical explanation, that's one, and the other is it was mass psychogenic illness. So on the medical side, we see that this can be really divided into two main theories. The first popular theory was that industrial toxins caused the problem in some subtle way. Essentially, we call this an interaction effect. That term interaction effect isn't really just applied to chemical interactions. We also see it in the world of mental health and really other fields as well. An example for mental health might be something like a combination of certain personality traits and mental health symptoms. So the idea is that something different happens because two or more of these constructs are occurring at the same time, something that we wouldn't see if just one was occurring. In terms of chemistry, the exposure of one toxin may not be detectable or have any noticeable consequences. Exposure to another toxin could yield the same result. But if two toxins or more toxins were combined, if they were present at the same time, then we might see some sort of special reaction. This is referred to as toxic layering. There are many potential toxins mentioned with this first theory. There had been a train accident in 1970 not far from the school that seemed to be at the center of the situation. In that accident, 30,000 gallons of trichloroethylene, TCE, was released, as well as 2,000 pounds of cyanide crystals. Not long before the situation started, there were several leaks of radioactive material and other material from a nuclear fuel processing plant that was about 90 miles away from Leroy, New York. Some have speculated that aluminum-based vaccines might be responsible, and there are many more chemicals in the area that I'm not mentioning. So it's actually a fairly long list, and some of these chemicals are listed in some of the references, again, that I put in the description. The second popular theory related to the medical explanation theory was that the individuals had a disorder called PANDAS, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections. So these symptoms, the related symptoms to PANDAS, could be something like obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms, symptoms related to Tourette syndrome, and of course tics would be one of those symptoms, and depression. And many of the individuals affected did seem to have symptoms from all three of these categories. Now, a problem here, of course, is this is a controversial diagnosis in the medical profession. On the other side, we have the mental health explanation, which essentially goes something like this. One or more individuals started to have tic-related symptoms, perhaps due to stress exacerbating underlying medical conditions. Other students in the same school were exposed to this information through social media, text messaging, and other means, and they viewed themselves to be at risk, perhaps from environmental influences existing in the area. And something similar happened to them. Stress combined with this information about the symptoms led to symptom manifestations. This explains why the spread of the symptoms was localized, at least for the first cluster of cases, because they were concerned about something to which all of them would have been exposed. So interestingly, with this mental health theory, the first few cases really had a medical explanation, but the other cases only had a mental health explanation. As I mentioned, the New York Department of Health indicated that mass psychogenic illness was responsible for what was observed. They noted that 3 of the 12 cases in the first cluster of cases, which were the only cases they discussed, had pre-existing medical conditions associated with tic disorders. One of these 3 actually had Tourette syndrome. So this, of course, is consistent with the conversion disorder theory. You have certain individuals that have a medical explanation for their symptoms, and other individuals whose symptoms are explained by conversion disorder. There were no common exposures or evidence of infectious etiology across all 12 cases. And the word etiology has to do with causation. So if something is etiological to a disorder, it caused the disorder. The entire group did not have any in-school or after-school activities in common. 4 were in cheerleading and 2 were in soccer, But again, the entire group was not included there. Every other possible explanation was ruled out. Environmental toxins, drug use, exposure to vaccines, infectious diseases. There was simply nothing left. No biological, chemical, or medical explanation for what had happened. What they did find, however, with 11 of the 12 cases, was the presence of significant life stressors. So we see 8 of the cases were diagnosed with conversion disorder, 3 cases had the pre-existing medical conditions associated with tics, and 1 of the individuals did not seek treatment. It's my understanding from the research literature and from reports that nearly all of the affected individuals improved within a relatively short period of time. There's really not much information about the second cluster of cases. They seem to be largely forgotten by investigators and the media. There are so many elements to this particular situation that are really fascinating, especially after reading so much about it and so many different opinions in the research literature and in other places. So essentially, as I mentioned before, people tend to pick between 2 popular explanations: environmental causes like toxins or infectious material, or conversion disorder. And both sides accuse the other side of being conspiracy theorists. Both sides accuse the other side of not being scientific, not being logical or rational, misleading the public, ignoring the simple and clear explanation and going with a more complex and unbelievable explanation, not investigating thoroughly enough, and not analyzing the evidence carefully, right? So we see, again, these accusations coming from each side toward the other side. There was also a unique claim made by the environmental side. They accused the conversion disorder side of pushing the media away, which did actually happen. Because in theory, when using conversion disorder as an explanation, media coverage might only spread the disorder to other people and make recovery more difficult for those people who already had the symptoms. So what do I think happened in this situation? Well, of course, I really don't know, but I'll review the strengths and weaknesses of each argument and provide my thoughts. So as I mentioned before, I'm really limited here to looking at this from the mental health side. My understanding of biology and chemistry is quite limited compared to my understanding of mental health topics. So when trying to explain events like this that don't have an obvious explanation, it's much more satisfying to find something biological or chemical as opposed to something from the world of mental health. And again, for conversion disorder, this is actually required. For conversion disorder to be diagnosed, medical explanations have to be ruled out. At first glance, the environmental argument seems powerful. There were many toxins in the area. Some of the levels were slightly high on or about the school grounds. And it's hard to know if the toxins interact with one another in some special way that hasn't been identified. But after reading all the material, all the tests that were done, all the findings, it just doesn't appear that there is one chemical or any combination of chemicals that all the affected individuals would have been exposed to that could explain the symptoms or why the symptoms eventually abated. So the environmental explanation seems to fail in 2 ways. It doesn't explain the onset or the remission of the symptoms. Now, of course, it's still technically possible that there was some sort of environmental cause. Again, as I mentioned, I don't really know what happened. But I think the findings tend to support that the third criterion for conversion disorder is actually met. Are the symptoms better explained by another medical or mental disorder? They don't appear to be. Conversion disorder seems like the best explanation, although it's really an unsatisfying explanation. What happened in Leroy, New York seems to fit with the diagnostic criteria of conversion disorder. We've seen conversion disorder occur before in somewhat similar situations. The presence of significant stressors is fairly convincing evidence. The disorder didn't necessarily randomly affect these 8 people. Significant stress was probably an important factor predisposing them to having the symptoms. Another part that seems to support the conversion disorder theory would be that second cluster of cases that are rarely discussed. In particular, the 2 people who lived 150 miles away and yet still developed symptoms. Now, one part of this whole situation that doesn't really sit well is this whole idea of a conspiracy. The professionals who are providing treatment asked the media to back off for the sake of the people they were treating and perhaps to prevent the spread of the disorder to other people. Some interpreted this request as evidence of a conspiracy. Now, it's hard to say if the media coverage made a difference one way or the other in terms of the symptom severity duration, or frequency. After all, the onset occurred without any media intervention. So we didn't see the media there before we saw the symptoms. But I can understand the professionals acting out of an abundance of caution. I think they just wanted to provide an environment where the people who they were caring for had the best chance of recovery. There is no evidence that they were trying to prevent the media from finding some sort of environmental cause or from talking to people who had that point of view. So I really don't think there was a conspiracy in any part of this. Not a conspiracy on the side of the conversion disorder supporters, so to speak, and not a conspiracy on the side of the environmental cause supporters either. I think this was just a really unusual set of circumstances that came together to lead to an unlikely set of cases. Now, I know whenever I talk about situations like mass psychogenic illness, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of mass psychogenic illness to be interesting. Thanks for watching.